Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Board Games I Got Rid Of and Why. So in this series I take a look at a bunch of board games that I used to have in my collection, but for one reason or another no longer do. And I tried to give some reasoning as to why I came to the decision to part with them. Now before I get started on these 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer. And if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. The first game I'm talking about today is Ulm. Now Ulm is a midway Euro game with some pretty cool mechanisms involved, particularly the main action selection system, as you have this 3x3 grid of tiles, and each round you're drawing a tile blindly from a bag and you're pushing that tile in a direction on that grid, and the 3 tiles you have remaining in that grid on the same row or column that you've just pushed onto are the 3 actions you get, which of course will change the game state for the next player because the tiles are going to be in a different orientation. And these actions are going to be pretty simple, such as just getting money. It could be moving your boat along this track to kind of start generating your victory points. But you could also get these kind of guild crests, which would gain you access to certain actions depending on where you were on that canal or on that river. So I did like the way that 2 of those mechanisms synergize with each other. I thought that this game was quite well polished and well designed, but I did have one glaring issue with it, and that was when it came to these cards that were involved. So some of these actions were drawing these action cards, and basically they would have different conditions on them, and there'd be 2 different conditions. You could have like an in-game condition and an end-game kind of set collection condition. And what I found was that generally speaking, the in-game conditions were pretty swingy and quite luck dependent, because quite a lot of the time you'll draw the perfect card that just so happened to suit what your current condition was, and you get a bunch of points for that without doing much work at all, where sometimes you'll get nothing at all. So it's like, it was a bit, I don't know, it was a bit jarring for me, and it could leave a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth just because maybe your opponent got a great card draw and you didn't. Other than that though, the game was well designed, as I said, some good timing exercises going on here, some good kind of engine building abilities, as you could invest in these buildings on the board where if people visited them, you get more points. If people took certain actions on that grid, you can get some income as well. But yeah, ultimately that card, the card mechanism did not do it for me, and it was enough for me to part with this one and not go back to it anymore. But I know this game does have its fans. It's a bit of a cult favourite, I suppose, but it wasn't quite up to, well, wasn't quite what I was looking for, I suppose, simply because of that swinginess of the cards. Next up, I have Gunkamono. Now, on paper, I should love this game because you couldn't really get more of a Knizia design, despite not being designed by Ryan Knizia. This is a tile placement game. As you're placing these kind of domino-shaped tiles onto this communal map, you're trying to get areas and put your pagodas down in order to start generating you victory points each round, depending on your coverage on that map. You can stack tiles on top of each other, meaning that you can start encroaching on the other players' regions, and of course they can sabotage yours by making your region smaller. If you don't want to add it onto the board itself, you could choose to climb these tracks, which will start getting you points if you climb up the quicker, and even unlocking you more pagodas as you go. A very smooth game, very definitely fine-tuned, but I struggle to find where the crunchy decisions came from here. It seemed like it would always be quite formulaic. Somebody would create a big region, start getting loads of points, people would start sabotaging it, the next person would have the biggest region, therefore they start sabotaging that one. So it was pretty predictable on what you should do. Just increase your own regions and make other people's regions smaller. And you know, the tile placement wasn't particularly taxing because it was just simple dominoes. But I did like the purity of the game, but I did think it slightly missed out on that magical spark that really kept me, wanted me to come back for more for this one, because I did play it quite a few times and I really did feel that there was something here that I should be feeling, but I never really got that despite giving it more than enough chances. So sadly, yeah, I couldn't really recommend this one despite me wanting to love it. That is Gunkamono. Next up, I have Doppelganger. This is a silly little party game where you are drawing the celebrity cards and you're discussing who amongst your friends is most like that celebrity. It could be personality-wise, it could be physical traits, and you are having a voting system to see who votes in the majority, who's voting for somebody on their own. They might suffer some negative points, and so on. So yeah, very simple stuff here. It's a one-trick pony. As a kind of a palate cleanser, it does a good job. We tend to play Euro games. This one being something completely different. It brought something different to the table, and we did enjoy it for that one play. But once you've gone through the cards, you've said what you need to say, there's pretty much no reason to go back to this one. So it's a gimmick. It's maybe a fun one to play at a gathering or something like that, but it's certainly not going to stay around for more than 1 or 2 plays maximum. So that is Doppelganger. Next up, I have Mercado. So Mercado is a game that's somewhat flown under the radar. It's a really good Dawn design, and I believe it came out the same time as games like the Quacks of Quedlinburg were really blowing up, because this one does share quite a few things with Quacks, as you're drawing these tokens from a bag. And in this one, instead of doing like a push your luck mechanism, you are assigning these tokens to these different kind of objects on the table which have requirements on them. So it might say, if you draw 2 blue tokens and a white one, then you can collect this tile and get X amount of points. But everybody is fighting over these artifacts at the same time, so it does have this kind of a race element to it, and it's all about how are you going to divide up the tokens that you draw, because you could say, I'll attribute this one to this tile, this one to this tile, this one to this tile. But there's always that sudden death thing going on, and you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but at the same time you want to keep your options open. It has a racing mechanism to it, as it's going to be the first to get to a certain amount of points. And there's even a somewhat of a timing exercise, as if you land your points marker on certain locations, then you can get little bonuses such as those wild white tokens, or even shedding these dud black tokens from your bag, which do nothing but clog up your bag. It's a really nice one actually. It's very smooth and it's way better than it actually sounds. But I think maybe this one got lost in the shuffle, because I think the gameplay and the visuals don't quite match up, because it's a very family-friendly, fun, breezy game, but the kind of art direction they went in was a bit more of a traditional Euro stuffy beige kind of visual aesthetic, which was a bit of a mismatch. But the game itself, I think, is underrated, and if you can find this one cheap, which you probably can, it's worth a shot. But ultimately, this one was on my shelf for a long time, and I never really found myself leaning to put it off the shelf. And I do have the Quacks of Quedlinburg, which I think is a better game, albeit there's a bit more setup, etc. But this one's worth a look, but maybe if you have games like this, it doesn't have quite as much going on as the aforementioned Quacks of Quedlinburg. Next up, I have What's the Actual Factual. Now, this is actually in the same series of games as the aforementioned Doppelganger, but this one you are going to be given a very difficult question, a very niche question, and then everybody is going to write what the answer could possibly be as a kind of a bluffing tool to try and get the other people to vote for that answer. But of course, the correct answer is also going to be in the mix. There's going to be a voting system. If you get the answer correctly, you're going to get some points. If people vote for your false answer, then you're going to get some points as well. So there's been a lot of games like this, tons of them out there, but this one was a good example of it. Some interesting questions. Some of them were much more difficult than others. Some of them, there's just no chance you'd get them. But as little factoids, it was quite an interesting deck of cards, and you could use them for other games. But for me explaining the rules, you probably understand what this game is like. There's tons of them out there. They've been around forever, but this is a strong example that you can get quite a few game sessions out of if you regularly get party games to the table. So if that's your jam, then this one's definitely worth a look, but we played through the deck of cards, therefore there was no reason for us to go back to it anymore. Next up, I have First Rat. Now, First Rat is going to be a difficult game for me to comment on, because just reading it on this list makes me doubt my decision as to why I culled this one from the collection, because this is a fantastic game. It's a family-weight game, but with plenty of decisions to be made as you are moving your team of rats up this track, collecting resources, trading these resources in for bonuses or points. taking shortcuts, building up a bit of an engine to increase your yield, getting these special powers, racing to get to the spaceship at the top. It's one of those games where you are rewarded for being the fastest at doing something. So if somebody is taking this strategy, you might want to go this strategy because there's more points to be had there. So there really is a sense of urgency in this game, which I love. Very simple rule set, very fun, and yeah, as I said, I am probably going to reacquire this one. Now, the reason I got rid of it in the first place was because when I originally acquired it, I played it quite a lot and maybe burnt myself out on it. And it was sat on my shelf for a long time thinking, or I didn't really have the urge to pull it back because I kind of got it out of my system. But for me, this is the kind of game I want in my collection because it does walk that fine line of being so accessible, but still having some meat on the bones here, as well as being wrapped up in a really charming package. So stay tuned, I'll probably end up reacquiring First Rat. Next up, I have Golem. So Golem is an interesting one. So this is actually from some of my favorite designers from the kind of Italian group of designers. This is definitely a heavy Euro as you are moving these golems down these 3 streets. Getting bonuses as you go, trying to keep your little students up with them or suffer some potential negative effects. You are building up an engine by increasing the abilities of your golems. You're increasing your kind of artifacts you're building, climbing tracks. Has a very interesting drafting mechanism to take your actions based on the Grand Austria Hotel rule set, where, and this one you are actually kind of putting these marbles in these runs, and kind of the more marbles in that particular column of marbles will be the stronger action you take. But the colour of marble is also important because that's going to allow you to move your particular students on these tracks to keep up with the golems. Definitely systems within systems here, tons of symbology, tons of rules, and the game is very good. You know, there's no denying that at all. But the reason I called this one was probably more of a personal thing in relation to where I am in my kind of my preferences in gaming. Now, a few years ago, I was very much into my heavier Euros. Now, I prefer it more at that medium weight, but still with the depth involved. Now, this one I thought was just a little, or moved the needle a little bit too far for me in terms of the rules overhead. Again, look, quite a lot of fiddliness going on here, and it's not the kind of game that I can just pull off the shelf and, you know, internalize the rules and get it played very soon, because again, there are so many rules within rules here. So despite me thinking it's a very well-designed game, it's not really what I was looking for in my collection, because I just tend to struggle to get these games to the table because you need the right game group. You need quite a large amount of time because it's a 2-hour game at least. And it, you need to be in the right headspace because it's going to be a brain burner. And for me, I'm tending to find those games not as enjoyable as something a bit lighter nowadays. So it wasn't quite right for me and what I'm looking for now, hence why it had to go. But still, objectively, a very well-designed Euro. Next up, I have Witchstone, which is a Reiner Knizia game, and it's something quite different to what Knizia has been putting out in terms of recent years, because this is definitely a more involved game as compared to his kind of more common kind of card games and filler games. This one is a series of mini games kind of held together through this tile placement system, as you have your own little cauldron and you're placing these tiles out trying to tie certain symbols together to get stronger benefits. So the more you connect a certain symbol, that action is going to become stronger and stronger and stronger, but it becomes quite puzzly because you are limited in what you can place at any time. You are going around this rondel and generating your victory points. You're building up routes on this communal board with your witches. You are trying to collect these contracts and fulfill them as much as you can. I'm climbing up this wand and trying to tie that up in terms of things you're doing in the rest of the game. So definitely kind of a series of mini games here held together through that core tile placement system. It's a hell of a lot of fun. It's very satisfying. It's fast. And it's pretty damn great. Now, the reason I got rid of it is because a very close friend of mine has a copy. I'm always looking for a reason to trim my collection down, and if my friend has a copy, then that's a great valid reason for me to cull the game from my personal collection, because I can play it any time. So that's the only reason really. If my friend didn't have a copy, I'd probably still own this one, and it was definitely one of my favourite games of the year it came out, which I think was probably 2 years ago now. But still, yeah, a lovely game. Again, it straddles that line of being very easy to play, very satisfying turns, a good forward momentum, and yeah, just a lot of fun really. So that is Witchstone, simply culled because somebody else has it and I can access it any time. Next up I have Murano, which is another mid-weight Euro. This one you are trying to aim towards these private objectives, which can be a ton of different things, and they generally tie to these buildings that you are kind of erecting on the board. You're building these pathways, these pedestrians are going to come out. You are very carefully managing your income because if I remember right, the financials in this game were quite tight, and it's held together through this rondel system as you're moving these gondolas around the parameter of the board. And depending on where you land is the action you can take, but all these different pieces are moved communally. So you have to be quite careful to not give your opponent too many opportunities, and the game could become quite congested at times as all the actions would kind of get bunched up down the bottom of the board or in a certain area of the board, meaning that you had to spend quite a bit of money to kind of change the orientation of these boats on that rondel, which I thought was actually a weak point in the game. I thought that congestion came into play a bit too often, and you could feel a little bit hamstrung as to the actions you could take. I also felt like the luck factor in this game it didn't quite gel with the rest of it. For example, there was this lucky dip system where you could draw these tokens or these little gems from a bag, which would be quite a strong way of getting income. And again, that swinginess of the card draws in this game was very significant for me. It kind of had that, I always call it the Takedo effect, if you're familiar with that game, Takenoko effect, where you could have the perfect orientation of what you need, draw a card that just so happens to match your board state, and you've basically banked a bunch of points here without doing much work at all, or you've not really earned those points. And that's what this game had in spades, really, and it did feel quite unsatisfying, and I didn't really enjoy it for that reason. I did like the way that you had to commit your workers to the different islands to correspond to those goals, but because it was a kind of a free-form liquid thing, you didn't really have to lock in what you wanted until the very end, and just through sheer card drawing, you could always keep improving your score by sheer luck, really. A hard game to explain. I'd recommend you check out my video review of this one to maybe get some more insight as to why this game didn't gel with me. But yeah, after playing this one, I wasn't really impressed by it, to say the least, and I thought it would be because I did like the rule set, but that card swinginess just did not do it for me. And the final game I'm talking about this episode is Ready, Set, Bet. Now this game is basically a horse racing simulation where you can either use an app or you can do it manually. But essentially tons of dice are going to be rolled. Depending on the combination of dice rolled, certain horses are going to move. And in real time, you are placing bets on the horses. But of course, if you bet on something and somebody's already gone there, then you're going to be blocked out of spaces. Therefore, there's that risk and reward. You know, am I going to go early and try bet on this one, where of course there are tons of variables that could happen, or am I going to wait till later until it's more of a short bet? But of course, that betting space could be taken by then. There are some extra rules you could add into the game, such as these specialist bets, which add a bit more advanced and more very kind of particular circumstances on these bets, but they will give you bigger rewards. And that's essentially what it is. It's a simulated horse race in real time. Definitely a high energy game, and it's great for parties because it scales so well. People are going to know what they're doing here because everybody innately knows how horse racing works. So there's not really any rules you need to explain or anything like that. It definitely feels like a throwback style of game, but with that touch of modernity with the apps, etc. Now, when I initially played this one, I was quite impressed with it. I thought it did what it did very well. I did like the way the app works, and I found it fun. But for me, the gimmick and the novelty of it wore off pretty quickly. And I did have a few games of this one where I introduced it to different groups and it just went down like a lead balloon. Nobody really got invested, and it just did not do what it was supposed to do, which of course maybe soured the experience for me, because you want people to enjoy these games, and if they're not enjoying it, then it makes you doubt getting it to the table again, because you have those bad memories assigned to it. And that was kind of what I was left with this one. I thought it was fine. I could definitely see why people like it, but I would rather play games like Long Shot the Dice Game, and I'd even rather play Camel Up than this one, because they're a bit more board gamey rather than just a simulation. So yeah, it's good for a game or two, but after that the novelty did wear off pretty rapidly. So that is Ready, Set, Bet. So there we have it. That concludes the video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it and found it useful. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.